Hi, everybody. Whoever everybody is, glad to see you. Glad to see you, Jonathan.
Good seeing you, friend.
You're. I'm just realizing your whole color palette. It's looking great there. I like what you've done with the shirt, and I'm sure that was an intentional
A little
move.
splash of white and a lot of gray and dark. So,
Well, glad to see those of you who are tuning in live, and for those of you that'll watch this later because you weren't available at 2 on a Wednesday. We're happy to at least theoretically see you. Trying to come together and find ways of being together virtually, and this is one of the ways we came up with. And I know a lot of people tuned in last week. I don't remember what you and I talked about, Jonathan, but um, today's conversation is rooted in quite a few. I don't know how many emails or comments you've gotten, but I've gotten a few comments, and my favorite one just went like this. So COVID-19, is this it? Is this the end? Which I'm not really qualified to answer that scientifically, but it's a sentiment I think that we're carrying because this is a really weird moment we're all in. And then it brings about these underlying assumptions and fears that, we're going to be the generation that's alive when the end of the world comes. The end, those are in all caps because it's a moment that's just inevitable. The end of the world. So we thought that we would talk about it, and you can talk with us about it. So if you've got questions and you don't mind having answers, that there's absolutely no way to prove that we're right for the most part, put your questions in the chat there, and we'll try to we'll respond to as many of them as we can. So, Jonathan, you've got a couple of comments. Oh, your kid came in just like you were that ambassador to Korea years ago. Your kid's taller than that one.
Very quickly close the door.
Yep.
So
I think the next move would be Adrian has to come in and kind of grab him and crawl out. I think that's how that went. So,
it's a very tall kid.
Yes. So yeah, you're hearing some of the same stuff, and a lot of it's rooted in, well, doesn't the Bible tell us that there's the end of the world?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think when you get to any moments like this, those are questions that always pop up. I mean, we've had several handfuls of these moments in our lifetime already. And that question seems to come up. And like you, that's gotten a handful of emails like that, just going, hey, do you think this is a sign? What should we be paying attention to? What does this mean for these things that I've read in the Bible, or these things that I've heard other Christians talking about? And and so that just sends people's minds spinning. And so we just felt like, hey, this is a good topic to at least wrestle with and talk about, not because you and I have any definitive answers on it, but it is something that we've definitely read a lot about, spent a lot of time thinking about, talking about. You and I have had conversations about this for 22 years, just you and I back and forth. And so
we were friends at Y2K.
We were.
So we've been talking about the end of the world for a long time.
Absolutely. So they say I've gotten a comment that I have an echo, which I still don't know quite how to fix, but I am going to unplug my headphones and see if that helps without the echo. So
yeah, we've been just we've had so many little technical issues. A lot of it's a learning curve. A lot of it's just a lot of people using the same technology. I have a group that I run on Wednesday mornings, and I've been doing it virtually. And 40 minutes into it, just everything came down, and I got frustrated right away. And because I thought it was Zoom, then I thought it was my computer, and then come to find out, somebody that knew what he was talking about said Spectrum had a little glitch, and everybody's internet that was related to Spectrum bounced just for a second and knocked a couple of us off. So it's just, appreciate your patience. Everybody's been so great and so gracious about. Keep trying, guys.
Right.
We'll work it out. So I've been thankful.
So we'll see. So I took the headphones out, and hopefully that'll help. So we'll see.
You need to boost your volume now, I think. You might get some of that feedback, but based on what I'm hearing, you might want to
turn your volume probably up do. So
a little bit. Your mic volume.
They'll let us know.
Yep. I can't hear you.
You can't hear me at all?
I just barely. All right. So while you're working on that, I thought maybe just as I was thinking about it this afternoon, the idea of there being the end of the world, maybe it would be surprising for some people to hear that that's not actually a clear teaching of anybody in the Bible. And you go so far as to say that it's not in the Bible. Mm-hmm. I think people would be surprised to find out that the end isn't really there. And that the ideas like when we talk about an apocalyptic event or the apocalypse, that typically that terminology has to do with that's the end of everything. And that word, and this is getting more common. I'm finding people know this more and more. Apocalypse just means like an unveiling. Mm-hmm. It's a rebirth. It's a new thing has begun. It has way more to do with what's starting than at all with what's ending.
Yeah. I remember the first time being really shocked when I found out that the phrase end of the world or end times wasn't in the Bible. Mm-hmm. That idea, the first time when it was like, no, the word, I heard so much growing up, like, well, the end times, and this is about the end times, or even things like the Antichrist. And then to come find out, mm-hmm. like, oh, the word Antichrist, it doesn't ever refer to one Antichrist in the Bible. It's always plural when it uses it, and it's only a handful of times. And it's referring very generally to people that are against the way of Christ. But end
it's times, also not in Revelation.
Right, exactly. And end times was another phrase, too, that it was like, oh, that phrase isn't in the Bible? Like, Jesus didn't talk about that? And so why has this become such a popular thing in our culture, especially within Christendom and the church, to talk about end times when it's a very contrary idea to what we see actually taught through in the Bible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The one of the big ideas that runs behind it, and a lot of the texts that are used to say this is what and we're not going to really get into those texts unless somebody has a specific question about it. Maybe I guess we could, but a lot of the texts that are used to bolster the idea that there is an end of the world and end times kind of thing, a lot of them are about what happened that we can read outside of the scriptures in 70 AD, which I think people know that when Jerusalem was sacked by the Romans, I think people have a general sense that happened, or they're aware that it did, and maybe aware that there's some controversy of whether or not it was that actually is even recorded in the Bible, which some scholars say, well, that tells us that everything in the Bible was written before 70 AD, so it was written pretty early on because an event that big would have been captured in the biblical canon. That's a debate. But when the fall of Jerusalem, when that happened, it was an absolute catastrophe. You've read about it, like how Josephus writes about it. It's like one of the worst moments in human history that Rome blocked off Jerusalem so that no one could leave, no supplies could come in, because there were, some of the Jews, they were some pretty solid fighters, and they kept causing problems. And Rome shut it down. Rome absolutely shut Jerusalem down. And it got worse and worse and worse as food ran short. There are stories of cannibalism and desperation where people just weren't even behaving as human beings anymore. It was absolutely ugly. And so the idea that what happened in 70 AD was, for a lot of people, like, this is the end. It's over. This is the hub of worship. This is where Jews come from all over to see each other in Passover and other festivals and that sort of thing. And now that the temple is destroyed, Rome has won. Where was God and all of that? For a lot of people, as it would be for us, it was the end. It's over. Our way of life, our tradition, our faith, it's over. It's the end of the world. And we even know, like, world, it isn't. When we say what is wrong with the world today, we don't mean the planet. We're talking about, like, us, the spirit, the human spirit. And for a lot of people, that was the end of the world, But the world went on, and there were still people. The end was at the beginning of something else. There is a way of thinking about that apocalyptic event. It wasn't the end of humanity. It was Rome being Rome.
Yep. Yeah, it's also comforting when we can be honest about that. Every generation of people have all thought there was an end in their generation. So when it talks about, there'll be rumors of wars and all sorts of other things going on. And so people then grab their moment and go, oh, it's really tough now. It's really difficult now. So this must be a sign that the end is coming. But every generation of people back through history, as you read through all sorts of accounts of history, multiple accounts of people who were convinced 100% that the end was coming in their lifetime based on what they saw or based on certain Bible prophecies that they read and how they interpreted that through their own lens. And so any conversation around this has to start with the humility of every generation has thought this. Every group of people somewhere along the line have had their Bible verses that they've been pointing to and that they've claimed is the end, and they were wrong. In the sense of the end of the global world and, everything burns up and that kind of a thing. Rather than what you're talking about, yes, we've had the end of all sorts of, actually what the Bible talks about, the end of ages, a certain end of age and the age of Rome and the way that they were ruling and the age of temple worship and how that was using to control and manipulate a lot of people. And in some senses, there is an end coming to the way that we understand a lot of the ways that we interact right now. So there's a bunch of ends from that standpoint that we can talk about, but it has to start with any conversation around this with people having lots of different ideas about it, which I can respect lots of different conclusions that people come to. But it has to start with the humility of everyone has thought, when you get into predictions and stuff like that, everyone's thought this in their lifetime, and every single person's been wrong, and every single group has been wrong in the way that they've seen the Bible, viewed the Bible, interpreted the Bible. And I would also say then, too, that other filter that's helpful is because we start with, what does this mean for me? And how does this apply right now? And so we tend to read biblical text through the lens of, I have to find, what does this figurative language mean? Who is it right now going on? And we try to name a person. And it's like the whole Antichrist movement. Okay, which person is this now? Which leader? And it's always someone we don't like. It's always someone that some group of people feels like, oh, I don't like this person, so I'm going to name them. They must be this Antichrist. Which again, there's no singular Antichrist in the Bible. So, but yeah, when we look through a lens of, rather than what it had to mean, whatever was being written, it had to mean something to the people at the time it was written to. They weren't writing for people 2,000 years later and trying to predict events. That just, nothing about that makes sense. And so it had to mean, at a minimum, it had to mean something to them. It was written as encouragement, as hope, as challenge, as whatever it was to people at a particular place in time in history. And when we lose sight of that, that's when people get off into some really wonky ideas and stuff. So,
do you ever read the Young's literal translation of the New Testament?
No.
I think he's the one. When he comes to the phrase that we're used to seeing as eternal life, I think he's the one that translated it age enduring, because it doesn't say, it's not the two Greek words that mean eternal and life. It's like a life of the ages, or age enduring is how you would literally translate that ancient Greek. And you're just talking about like we see ends of ages. We've seen ends of ages even within our lifetime. I like to think that age enduring, this eternal quality of life versus what happens after I die, that the emphasis is on, what if you could live in a certain way that would outlast all these little bumps, all these little human moments, these experiments of, maybe we can overpower people this way, and maybe we could take advantage of each other this way. Maybe we could kill each other into peace this way. Like, round and round and round. It happened in ancient Rome. It's going to happen in this country. It'll happen in 1,000 years, and whoever has replaced us, but age enduring, this way of Jesus makes it through in one form or another. And I that's a way more inspiring, not only like meta inspiring to me, but like in a day to day, live in such a way that's not dependent as much as you can. We're all part of the culture, but live in such a way that can endure and transcend the cultural moments of your life.
Yeah. What about
is it Matthew 23, 24?
24?
Which one is it?
Yeah.
That a lot of scholars, what is it?
24.
24. That think is about the temple. Jesus warned about the destruction of the temple.
Yeah. Yeah. 24 is a really.
I knew you had. Was Matthew? What? Go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, that it's got all sorts of weird language in 24. You know what's going on. So I think 23 is the woes to you, like when he calls out all the religious,
all the
leaders.
pastors. That's why I don't think about 23. I wanted to focus on 24. Woe to you, spokespeople for God.
So
are your go ahead.
I was going to say, let's I think maybe just let's chat about some popular themes that come up around this time. Like, so you hear phrases like Armageddon. People talk about that, or rapture, or, the sign of the beast, 666, all that kind of stuff. Like, that's all popular language and imagery that gets thrown around in this time. So let's tackle some of those, at least in terms of talking about how let's just go for it,
Yeah, let's tackle it. Let's pin it to the ground. Yeah. You go first. Which one of those do you like the most?
All right. Well, let's talk about, we can talk about 666. Let's start there. Name that one last. But we've actually we've referenced this in a few teachings here in the past few years, that we could go back and point you toward messages where we spent a lot more time talking about it. But so again, you have to start with a big picture view of understanding what kind of literature Revelation is and other certain types of apocalyptic literature that are written very much in figurative language. They're written in metaphor, they're written in symbol, and they're done so for a reason. That's how you have the guy John, and the author of Revelation, whoever that was, that he's writing to primarily to try to encourage Christians who are under a great oppression in Rome. And you can't critique the specific Caesars by name and expect to live. If you're caught carrying around those kinds of documents, a letter that's supposed to be an encouragement of hope to you, and you're carrying around a document that undercuts and criticizes Caesars, then you're going to get killed. So there's a whole lot of figurative language that gets used in metaphor that's very common in Jewish literature and ancient Hebrew literature. And again, speaking to a Hebrew people, many of whom were rooted with Hebrew imagery, we got to understand that. So even starting off with the beast, this idea of the beast, that's a very common word that they would use to refer to rulers, that they would refer to Caesars. And so then when you get into like this number 666, there's a numerology that Hebrews would use also in terms of letters and how they would spell out words, and that words would be used, each letter in the Hebrew alphabet would be assigned a numerical value. And when you would add it up, then it could relay a specific name. And so when you take 666, it's actually Caesar Nero, who was the Caesar emperor at the time when John likely was probably writing something like this, that, we could put that on a screen sometime or point it out to how all that adds up. But his name adds up to, in Hebrew, 666. So he's making a direct reference to a Caesar at that particular time and the oppression that people are under that ruler. But he's doing it in such a way where he doesn't have to name Caesar Nero, so that if a Roman finds this letter and reads that, you're not getting your head chopped off and killed for it. So, but rather than people wondering about, oh my goodness, this mark of the beast, is this barcode now that we're going to see? And so when people install chips in their pets or human beings now, is this the sign of the mark of the beast and the end of the age and all these kinds of things? Like, we can debate the wisdom of those types of things, and that can be one discussion. But the idea that it's tied back to this 2,000-year-old letter that's predicting doom and gloom and all of that just is very disconnected from reality and what the writer of writers of Revelation were trying to communicate. So
yeah,
you can have some other thoughts to that.
Some of us grew up Catholic. Remember, it wasn't 666; it was 616, and that was because the Latin Vulgate knew that John of Patmos was referencing Nero. So I think in Latin it's Neron, which in order to spell that alphabetically, it'd be 616. And so he, rather than transferring the number, he transferred the interpretation. So that's sort of fascinating. And it's also interesting when people talk about Mark of the Beast. I've heard a couple of people, they're concerned that the vaccine, that this is all a conspiracy, this COVID-19 thing, and it's so that we will all be forced to do vaccines like it's already happening in Denmark or wherever, forcing everybody to do it. And then what they're doing is putting if you're tuning in now, I'm saying somebody else believes this. They're putting microscopic little nano chips in the serum, in the vaccine. And so we're all going to have body heat recharged microchips, and that's the mark of the beast. Well, I have no idea how one would prove such a thing. And I understand why conspiracies are so popular, but it sort of begs questions like, if that's the mark of the beast, because apparently, your head and your hand radiate the most heat. And so that's where it's going to be best recharged, so it fits perfectly into Revelation 13. Who's the beast? If it's the mark of the beast, who's the beast? Well, it's probably one of the leaders you don't like. And as soon as you start saying this equals this, then you have to you got to go all the way out and figure out who the others are. And Jesus just wasn't about that. Jesus was always saying, there is no other. I'm trying to take the two and make them one. I'm removing the dividing walls of hostility, literally and figuratively. Our impulse is always to say, here's that thing from one obscure passage in a book of Revelation that no two people agree on. And which means there's a beast, which means there's a system, and we otherize ourselves so that we can be, so our egos can develop a right team to be on. And we do it all over the place. I mean, the end of the world has been promised to me since 1975. I mean, I think I would guess 20 different times with books and everything. Y2K, we made a joke. Hal Lindsey said it was going to be in the early 80s. There was the Nostradamus. You remember him, the late 80s. And there's always an other. There's always a system. And so I'm not saying the system is inherently good or bad. It's the otherizing is contrary to the work I think that age enduring Jesus followers are supposed to be about. That's my feeling on it.
Well, it comes back to that general take too, that what we're reading in the scriptures, rather than trying to figure out what's being mystically written that's predicting something 2,000 years later, is that we're reading the story of the people of God and how they've navigated life and what they learned and what they experienced. And now we are people that are called to figure out there are plenty of lessons that we can learn from that, but how are we experiencing what God is up to now, and how are we navigating that and walking through that in our current reality? And we can learn from, wow, like here's how these early Christians approached, the oppression that was going on in their government, how they tried to encourage one another when they felt like people's human rights were being violated. And there was incredible oppression going on. This wasn't a matter of oppression like someone doesn't let me say Merry Christmas. This was, sorry, but yeah, this is.
Don't be. That's as persecuted as we are.
Gosh, yeah, this is about people being burned on stakes, as human lanterns. It's a totally different world. And so, yeah, we can learn from their stories, but rather than trying to figure out how do I project what was going on there and make it apply literally to something right now is, man, that's what people get. They're making the Bible do gymnastics and crazy gymnastics that just never meant to be. So,
yeah, I think it's probably important to point out that this end of the world language that's sort of waiting for. So I've got several paragraphs in my head at once, and I'm not sure which one should be first. But this idea that there has to be an end of the world is oftentimes connected to a notion of God that isn't very much like Jesus. And if you're not a Christian and you're of a different tradition, then I honor and respect that. But in the Christian tradition, God already punished sin on the cross. And there are some denominations where they've been taught to say, well, only for people who prayed the prayer or came to the right conclusion or were part of the right denomination to accept that work, and then the rest of us are hung out to dry. But Jesus says it is finished. He doesn't say it is finished for Presbyterians. He says it's finished. And then the place where the sacrificial system happens goes away. And so, really, at the heart of the Christian tradition is that sacrifice is done. Punishment for sin has been rendered, by that kind of theology. So then thinking, well, but God is still going to send hurricanes during hurricane season because of an LGBTQ parade in Louisiana, right? That's a whole different religion,
right?
And I pick on that to make a specific joke about that. I don't want to pick on that group of people, but it's always some other group of people othering once again that God is still like some other volcanic Zeus type deity. And if you don't throw in some sacrificial offering, some person, some group as a scapegoat, God is still up to, God never was. Jesus's father said, I don't want sacrifice. I want mercy and love. We're still trying to appease the volcano, and we didn't appease the volcano. And so guess what? Now we've got COVID-19. And that's a different religion. If that's your religion, I honor and respect your right to believe that. It's not Christianity.
Yeah. That idea that,
and I hope that doesn't exclusive. To me, that takes weight off.
Right. Well, it's that same idea too that we love to. I hear people all the time love to quote the passage of that God is the same today, forever. Yesterday, today, and forever, and doesn't change. But all of a sudden, it's this end of the world philosophy language in Christendom, and and a broad, and I'll say the broad evangelical discussion of that Jesus changes dramatically. All of a sudden, we have this humble servant, loving, compassion, grace-filled, comes in great humility, Jesus that teaches us the way of grace and love. And then the same God then who is supposed to be the same yesterday, today, and forever, then come the end of the world is supposed to be, now I'm coming guns a-blazing. I've got my AK-47 out. I am slashing people in the streets. Blood is pouring everywhere. And now I'm coming in this fierce judgment to unleash this wrath. It's like, I don't understand that. I don't understand the disconnect of, wait a second, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Jesus is the reflection of God for us. And yet Jesus suddenly is going to wake up one day like in a really bad mood and then just ravage the world, and burn it all up and destroy it. It's like, wait a second, like what we're talking Marvel movie, sci-fi stuff that's not actually aligned with teachings of Jesus and isn't actually aligned with Scripture. But again, us trying to, other people, Jesus is going to destroy all the people that I don't like. And that's what I want Jesus to do. And so, which gets us back to this idea of rapture. So I don't know, or Armageddon really, but I'd love for you to just kind of speak to that a little bit too and say, because that's kind of that idea. Like Armageddon's either here's this big war that's supposed to happen that marks the end of the world, or rapture, like all these people get zapped away to some other place. And then everybody else is left for some period of time to, battle it out through tribulation.
Yeah, well, it's sometimes helpful. Like Megiddo is still a place. You can still go there. It's a big valley in a plain. And so lots of wars were fought there. because they didn't dress in camouflage and sneak up on each other like we started doing in recent history. So when you say Armageddon, you are referencing a very specific place, a piece of geography that has had a lot of war. And so the idea that what the author of Revelation was really talking about was America in 2,000 years, that's typical for us to think that way, but America is not featured directly in the Bible. So Armageddon is just, yeah. It's a very specific reference, and it can be used metaphorically, and I think it was being used metaphorically. But when you know where that metaphor is rooted, it helps you weed out a lot of interpretations 2,000 years later on the other side of the world. The rapture, I haven't thought about the rapture in a lot of details since I got a chance to talk to a guy named Zach Hunt, and he wrote a book called Unraptured, and is really helpful. I recommend the book, but he gets into the detail of how new the idea of the rapture is. And this idea and its associated passages that there's going to be, and there's, even debate within rapture believers that there's going to be a moment where God takes a whole bunch of people to where they're not meant to live, according to Genesis, but now they have to go live somewhere else up in heaven with him. And then Kirk Cameron and everybody else has to live on Earth for some duration of time. There's some tribulation, which just means troubles, trials, and then at the end of that, based on where you're at, what camp you're in, then it's the end, or there's another chance, or whatever it is. But the idea that you're going to be mowing your grass and somebody's going to be in the house doing dishes and you're going to disappear. I guess your clothes will be in the yard if you're a good Christian, and you're going to go up. And this, it's funny. I'm still here. Yeah, very nice. No. It would have been cooler if there was some effect, some green screen effect where your shirt just kind of fell. Yeah. We'll work on that for next week. But this idea is, and this maybe it come as a shock for some people, but it's not in the Bible. It's now you can sew things together and make it say that, like a lot of things, but that's not a biblical idea that God is going to take some people off of the earth, let the earth spin out and burn, and then come back and say, did anybody change their mind since it's been, a living hell? And then take another couple, or then tell them, no, you thought that was bad, it's going to get even worse. It's not in the Bible. But this return of Jesus and meeting Jesus in the air, as Paul wrote once, all of that had context. When a government official comes to town, you go out and meet him, and that's the parousia. That's if Caesar comes around, then you better run outside your town, and that you can read about this outside the Bible. You run outside of town and you throw down flowers and you play music and you celebrate. Of all places, Caesar, the Lord and Savior of all the earth, has come to our little village. You're going to make a big deal out of that. You going out to meet him is how you pay homage or obeisance, however you say that. It's worship. It's respect. It's honor. Well, to say that Jesus is going to come and we're going to meet Jesus in the air is a great picture of, we're not going outside of town. We're going to go up because this is the King of Heaven. It's supposed to be a bigger picture, using the existing culture, using the existing practices, and then reinterpreting it and hybridizing it with the language that's already there for a bigger picture. To then, in America, in like 1850, say, this is how it happens. You're going to float. We've been to space. That's not how it works. It's not something to look forward to. Really what it says is God can't fix this. And so what Christians do is leave, like that's the best God could come up with, is a team of people who leave. That's just not interesting. It's not what we need. So again, I know that could be a surprise for some people to hear. I recommend his book, Unraptured. It's really good.
Yeah. I mean, even that picture with emperors and Caesars, when they would go out to meet them, then they would walk back into their city, into their hometown. It wasn't like I would go out and meet the emperor and then we would all go someplace else.
Oh, right.
Yeah, you would go out to meet the Caesar, the emperor, and then you come back into your town. And so, again, this idea that the earth gets burned up and we all go someplace else, it doesn't match with the imagery that we see in terms of the culture at the time. And so I always think another thing that's important that we have to remind ourselves is we talk a lot about figurative language, and we talk a lot about metaphor and how they're drawing imagery from their culture and using it at the time. But that figurative language, again, doesn't mean not true. It means it's a way of expressing truth differently. And that gets a big hang up for a lot of people because they're saying, oh, you're saying the Bible's not true. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the Bible's using figurative language and metaphor very often to communicate truth. And we do that all the time. Jesus did that all the time. The scripture writers do that all the time. They're using metaphor, they're using story, they're using illustration to communicate truth. So it doesn't equal not truth. And we just get hung up on that. And a lot of people, you and I, we get criticized for that when we bring up a natural point. But the idea of the rapture, I mean, like you said, that's a 150-year-old idea. And so when people are like, well, how are you not teaching? This has always been taught. And people don't realize, what you think has always been taught is only what you've grown up hearing. And you're ignoring 1,850 years of church history and the way people thought about it. And for the vast majority of Christian history, people would have thought you were off your rocker if the Left Behind kind of books and novel picture of you're getting zapped off into some other place and floating in the sky. They would have been like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But
why can't we sing the traditional hymns like I'll Fly Away?
Right.
because we're trying to be even more traditional, maybe, is an answer.
Right.
Because for most of history, be like, what are you singing? Where are you intending to go?
Yeah. So maybe it'd be good to talk about before. And again, you can ask questions if you have questions. But I recognize that what we're talking about. I mean, we've talked about this for 25 years. You and I. But can also I'm hoping that there's some freedom in that, and there's hope in that. But I also recognize it can be, dismantling a little bit, where it feels like, whoa, wait a second. Like, now I don't know where to put my feet and my beliefs and those kinds of things about this end of the world idea. So maybe we could talk about just what are some encouraging ways that we look at it and say, okay, then this is, here's a way that we step into the everyday. This is the way we step into day-to-day life as people in this tradition of following the ways of Jesus and following the Christ. What's this look like for us in a way that makes sense and is relative to our actual world?
I love that. And I think it's a way more interesting and important question. Rather than asking, is this the end? And I'm not judging that. I understand that question. I know that there are awesome, great, good thinking people who are like, gosh, is this it? And there's a lot of young people, my kids are even like, how bad is it? We're all kind of watching the flight attendant's face right now. How bad is this turbulence? But the question, the passive question of, is God doing something, is sometimes like, is this inevitable? Like, is there nothing I can do? And for me, the relief that comes from, I'm not waiting for God to end this. For all we know, we're the early church. I mean, this is a old story, and it's an old planet. And for all we know, we're just getting started. People in 10,000 years can reference what was happening in America in 2020 as the primitive church, still trying to figure things out. Now we only get to live a handful of decades of that, but this might be the early church. And so I'm more interested in that question. What are we going to do with COVID-19? What does the golden rule look like? How are we waking up to, especially Americans? Hey, what I do is none of your business. We are learning really fast. That's BS. That everything I do affects you. everything I do in one way or another affects my neighbors. We have to learn that right now. But I just want to go to the store. I just wanted to, yeah, but you might be a vector for somebody else's suffering. So it might not affect you, but then you have to live with that you're the domino that knocked domino 25 down, We're learning that. And so to like, how can I put that on display? I think those are really, really interesting questions. And I'll say one other thing, and then I want to hear your answer on it. I'm also thinking about how, like it was teaching John, discussing really John chapter 6 this morning with some others. And, Jesus is outside of town and that's the fish and the loaves. And like, there's this big mass of people and there's nothing to eat, but there's this, this kid's zigzagging through people trying to sell fish and loaves, takes it, everybody eats, there's leftovers. And how that's a picture of bread and circuses a little bit. Caesar used to do that. He used to throw bread at people to say, look how good it is to live here. I took your land and took the wheat and made you bread, But so Jesus does this thing outside of town, and it's this creative act that answers a very real need in a way it's a little different than if you go into town and you're part of the system. And so I told the story this morning too, that I have a neighbor that was just diagnosed with cancer, and she's scared. They're an older couple. And I think I might have even mentioned it last time you and I talked here, of just the impulse to want to hug her or hold her hand and can't touch her for all the reasons. Last night, 6 or 7 cars paraded in our cul-de-sac for her. We could hear cars running. We looked out, opened the front door, and they're driving in the circle, holding signs to their sunroof that say, "We love you," with her name, and out the window. Because if you can't hug somebody, the next best thing is a parade, right? And it was such a way of saying, in the absence of some of the choices and freedoms and ease and comfort, rather than saying, somebody come alleviate this. God, what are you doing or not doing, all that? They said, what's plan B? And that's super inspiring as people of faith to say, what are the resources? What's our bread and fish? And how do we turn that into more love and more light when the planet gets dark? So that's where my head's at with this particular, this next chapter and how hard it is to be a human.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's great. I spent a lot of my childhood growing up in the church when I was young, and probably even into my teenage years, where I kind of grew up with this mentality of just asking, Jesus, I just want you to come back and fix all this. But when I was honest as a teenager, I was like, I want you to come back after I get married and have sex. But it was, that was the frame of mind. Like, okay, I want you to come back, but not that bad. I want to be able to do all this stuff first and then come back, and then, we're good and come fix this world. Then as I got, even in my early 20s, there was something about sitting around with people and going, man, we need to pray for Jesus to come back and rapture this thing and blow this world up and take us home. And I think more and more that frame of, again, like you, I respect where that comes from, and I grew up around it, so I understand it, and it comes from a really, I think, really good-hearted place. It's not evil.
It's sincere.
Yeah, it's very sincere. But it disconnects people from a reality, and it's waiting for someone to pull the emergency switch and give someone else responsibility for being a part of getting your hands dirty and doing something about it, versus asking the questions now, okay, what's it look like for me to partner with the Christ, to partner with the Spirit of Jesus and what God wants to do in the world, and how am I a part of that solution? And what does it look like to be a part of a community, to be part of a church where we're coming together as a group of people trying to say, how do we help bring more of heaven to earth? How do we bring more of God's heart to earth right now? How do we bring more love? How do we bring more grace? How do we bring solutions? How do we look at tragedy in the face and say, what's it look like to come alongside and love and to bring healing and help? And I think that is a way more motivating. That gets me up in the morning. That to me is way more motivating than sitting around saying, Jesus, you just need to come back on this floating cloud and get us all out of here. And so I think that for me is just this, the more and more people we can have going, oh, I want to partner with the redemption and the resurrection of Jesus and in the healing of the world. And I'm an active participant in that. And I want to link arms with other people who want to be a part of that. Then we're actively trying to solve real life, day-to-day problems that we're facing in our world right now. And that's worth getting up for me. But not just waiting around, waiting for someone else to fix something.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and maybe it's helpful to hear that everything you just said, all that's spiritual. Right. That's all spiritual work. That's all ministry.
Right.
That's not the things that you do and then your spiritual life, which is like the thoughts that you have, the pure or impure, all that. Everything you just described is like that's our life. That's all spiritual.
Yeah.
I dig it.
So yeah. So
how are we doing on questions?
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions that are out there. If anybody has anything, we'll hang around for a few more minutes, and that's our conversation about it. So we'll see.
My office this afternoon is my daughter's room.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
It's my daughter's guitar. Ready to take your questions. I swear that my answer will have a melody to it.
Yeah, everybody might have left us a long time ago, too. There might just not be any questions. So
it's all right. We have me and you and this.
We're here.
Guitar and the truth.
Well, our interpretation of it, so. All right. Well, friends.
Is anybody curious? Anybody have any questions or anything? Or things they want to add?
Yeah, man.
I'm looking. I don't know how accurate this is to look online.
Here we go. Got a question.
Sharon said, I am still here. All right. Well, it's me, you, the truth, and Sharon.
All right. So we have a question here. So do you feel there is a lesson for humanity through this situation? So I'll even throw that up on the screen there. I think that's part of what I just got into a little bit. But yeah, do you have anything else that you'd feel like to add to that?
A lesson for humanity?
What do we feel like is a lesson we can learn for humanity through this situation?
I'm not sure the species all learn something at the same time. We don't have a lot of evidence that we all learn something at the same time. Can you still hear me?
I can.
There are probably some huge exceptions to that, and maybe this will be one of them. Yeah, but certainly we're seeing a lot of people, like you're talking about, everybody learning the golden rule, and I think I've got that old proverb: when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. The teacher shows up, and so I hope we're ready to learn something new, ready to face our own frailty and the frail systems that we call strength. And there's a real chance for at least a lot of the species that are connected the way that we're used to in the West connecting. We could all be learning something. So yeah. I'm hopeful.
I think your point on too that everything we do affects each other is super important. It's that waking up to, all my actions, all that I do, all that I say, it affects everyone else. So I'm hoping if we could wake up to that, and we can wake up to what I don't notice a lot right now, which I think is a good and beautiful thing, is, hey, let's just try to figure out how we protect the church from COVID-19, the Christian church, or how do we protect Republicans or Democrats, or how do we not worry about the people, that believe different faith traditions? Rather, everybody tends to be right now, we're in a moment, in a beautiful way. Doesn't matter what you believe, doesn't matter what your religion, what your faith tradition is, your politic. Like, there's a recognition of humanity that this is affecting all of us, and all of us are valuable, that all of us, our lives are worthy of value and treatment with respect and dignity, and we got to figure out how do we love and care for each other. I hope that through this, that's something that we can keep waking up to, and that will affect actual day-to-day life after this is over. Rather than going back into tribalism and me against you, and I don't care what happens to you as long as my tribe are okay. There's a way that this is stripping down all the labels and separators. So,
I think there's also a chance to, if we'll really pay attention and remember, when we get through this, not if, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt us in different ways, but when we get through this, to remember that we got through it. And so the very next time that we have an opportunity to hoard, to center self, to circle the wagons and say me and not yours, us and not you, which is all of that is a legitimate fear response, but it happens at our own expense. The next time we'll say, maybe I don't need all the toilet paper. Maybe I don't need to go quills out like a frightened porcupine and turn on people and turn away. And I was going to say the word isolate. I mean it differently in the sense of that we're social distancing, but to start cutting people off and otherizing, because it's going to happen again in our lifetime. I would say most of us listening to this are going to go through another. Is this how bad is this going to be? I think to be wise is to say, remember what happened last time? We're good. I love you. How can I help? Not every man for himself, every woman for herself. I hope we'll learn that.
Yeah, I do too.
I also want to point out Brandon Turner. He's not on staff at Crosspoint. Tirza is, but he's a professor and teaches. I think he was watching or still is, but I got a text a little bit ago. We were talking about the 1908 Schofield Bible, and he sent me a note that he said the night. You can't hear me?
No, I just said like you do. We're talking about the Schofield Bible in 1908.
Well, it's because he's teaching a religion class, and it's really fascinating, and it's something I'm trying to pay more attention to. But so early 1900s Schofield Bible, the note he just sent me was that it ruined everything because it taught regular, everyday people of faith to look for events, to interpret events as the major feature of their faith, a way of interpreting tea leaves constantly. That's my Christianity versus looking like Jesus in a world that needs Jesus. And so I think we're still stuck in that. I'd like to hear him talk more about that. He might be good to add to a conversation sometime. He can really get down on the weeds on that stuff. But yeah, all of that's just it's a brand new thing that feels like this is the way it's always been, right? And it's just really not. It's not only new, it's from a global perspective localized. There are people who are alive on the planet now. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not how we think about this at all. It's totally different.
There's a question here. It shifts gears a little bit, but I think this is a lot of us as maybe parents and kids of teenagers. Similar spot. Advice for teenagers who are relishing this time off, but need tough parenting on doing college prep and studying for the ACT. Yeah, that's. I think you're managing the right tension already. By acknowledging that they're relishing the time off, and say, maybe in this pressure cooker of a school system that we live in, especially here in Wake County, North Carolina, that can we use it as a little bit of a time to unleash, let go of some of that pressure, let the steam out a little bit, and say, what's it look like to take a breath? Because when we have seen the suicide rates of kids in Wake County and everything else skyrocket over the last decade, maybe we can use this to take a couple breaths. Yet, the other side of the tension is it's being responsible with your time and not just wasting it and saying, what can I do? So I don't know if I have advice for parents of teenagers exactly on how to handle it, because I think God's going to give the best wisdom to each individual parent on how to parent your own kid. I'll tell you what I did with mine. So of having teenagers and all that, where it was just kind of said, hey, I'm trying to get you to look ahead to your future and to say, can you spend, for us, like I would say just even like this past summer, it was, okay, can you spend 30 to 45 minutes a day on this? And in our case, I was like, even if that means you don't work a hourly job somewhere as much right now, can you spend 30 to 45 minutes doing this? Because if you do, that might help you later on, and it might save you more money later on. And if you can figure out how to, buckle down and spend 30 to 45 minutes. But trying to do it in bite-sized chunks, trying to cast vision, trying to say, here's the reason why, and here's why that's wise. But not trying to make it too much either, where, they do want to relax. They do want to have fun. They do want to connect with their friends. And so just, I think like anything, it's finding a balance and using both right now, but also not putting so much pressure on. I think a lot of our teenagers too, in their world, whether they admit it or not, they have a lot of uncertainty right now too, and anxiety that's sitting under there that they have no idea what that holds. And so I want to be sensitive to adding a whole lot more pressure and stress and anxiety on our kids in a situation where there's already plenty around them. So let's be responsible. Let's not be unwise. Let's be responsible with our time, but let's not try to add too much stress and anxiety because they already got a bunch. So I don't know. Do you have anything else to add to that?
I'm with you. I think being able to ask the question and recognize that there are tensions to manage, I think it's important. I might also, at risk of sounding like I want to pick on semantics, I really don't, because I think it's a good question. But just even the phrase "tough parenting" and all that. Just remember, getting your kids into a college isn't the fruit of tough parenting. The toughest parenting, I think, is figuring out how to teach our kids in this culture how to be self-giving. And so, whether or not we feel like we get our kids ready for college or a particular college or whatever that is. And all that's great. And, I've got 3 teenagers and one of them's already out of school and has already been through a program. So I'm pro education, but not like morally. It's just, if you can do it, do it. But I don't think that's my job as a parent is to get you ready for your ACT and ready for school. Kids can go to college or not go to college. I'm more interested in, especially in a moment like this, do you know how to give yourself? Yeah. Do you know how to take care of yourself, but do you know how to give yourself? So asking more than one question is the bottom line, but make sure that one gets added in there too. And you watch what pressure you're putting on yourself. Like, what does being a good parent mean? There's a lot of great kids that never stepped foot in the university. And I know we know that. We all know that. We need more kids that give themselves.
But we need to get reminded of that. And so I think those are things we're trying to do, even in our own home, is spend a little bit of time, even though sometimes my kids roll their eyes or whatever, but we'll spend time talking about, like, okay, we're going to spend the next 20 minutes and we're going to watch this video or this TED Talk or have this discussion on. Let's talk about our hearts and the kind of character of people that we want to be and what we want to do in the world in terms of loving and caring for people. And let's focus on the kind of human you're becoming. Because that's going to matter way more than what kind of job you end up having. Is let's deal with the kind of human that you are. So, all right. Someone asked this: is there a schedule for live events that are coming up? Yes.
Yeah.
So you can. If you're not on Crosspoint's email list, that's getting mailed out right now currently on Sunday evenings. So you can go to crosspoint.org/enews, ENEWS, and you can sign up for that, and that schedule will be sent to you. That schedule is also posted on our Facebook page. So at Crosspoint's Facebook page, if you go down and scroll down a little bit, it should say ways to connect online. If you click on that, that should take you to that email that got sent out. And you'll see a schedule of all this week of different live events that are happening. So that if any of those interest you, check them out, mark them on your calendars, come hang out. Because this is something hopefully we'll continue to do and look forward to it. So, Steve, thank you for your time today. Feels like an hour's long enough for us to interrupt people's day.
You told me. Yeah. You told me I had to do this, so you're thanking me like it was optional. So
that's true. So,
but I would say thank you for being nice to me in front of people.
You're welcome.
No, it's fun. I don't I don't know what our next subject is going to be. I was just looking at, it looked like the YouTube feed needed to be refreshed. There were some people that it hung up on it a little bit, and so I was looking. So yeah, it looks like you got to refresh that one. But yeah, so I don't know what we'll be talking about next, but people should feel free to tell us.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Things they want to talk about.
All right. See you guys. Take care.
All right.
Bye.